So Tim Yurkiewicz, I work for the US Forest Service, and my current position is the Fuels and Fire Ecology Training Specialist. So I deal with all the national curriculum that is associated with fuels and fire ecology. There is, I don't know if you're familiar with NAFRI, it's the National Advanced Fire Resource Institute, and we do all of the upper level training. A lot of people in our organization in the fire world call us the Graduate School of Fire. We like to jokingly say it's where you go when you're at the end of your career. But with that, it's a place where we do a lot of the more longer term training normally you've got a lot of stuff on your belt before you get to you end up taking the classes in NAFRI. So Nicole, there is a class, you can go to it. It's our M580, it's Fire and Ecosystem Management. And it is a class that you can take that doesn't require any fire qualifications. It's a condensed version of what you'll be learning with Heather. And so I do recommend staying within this program with Heather, but it is an opportunity somewhere down the line if you have personnel who don't want to take it, who do not want to take this class or go in this program, there are options to go there as long as you're with a organization, state, local, municipality wise, you can go there. So that's a plug for NAFRI. And feel free to interrupt at any time if you want while I'm talking, because while I know Heather had some questions for us to answer and talk about with the two of us, three of us here, there's going to be an opportunity for some more informal question and answers, as well as targeting some of the stuff you got to. Because one of the things I wanted to get at was why y'all wanted to be in fire. And so, Colin, you reached towards it in the sense that you like the idea of what I think is the most important part about wildland fire management in the agencies is that when you work for a federal agency, and I can't speak for the states because they have a little different mission, the DOD has a little different mission as well. But when you work for one of the big five, that being the Forest Service, the BLM, the BIA, US Park Service, and Fish and Wildlife Service, you are a land manager first. Fire is just a tool that we use to manage that land. And for those who, and I'm not sure if Heather will cover this in the course because I remember seeing the content, but for those who are familiar with it, in the United States, Native Americans were the first land managers using fire. It is the only tool that we can use as human beings to manipulate some of the environment around us. Think about how upset the people living downstream of a dam would be if we released that dam to try to create a flood. They'd probably be a little upset. But fire is one of those tools that we can use to manipulate the landscape. And so historically, it's been used that way for multiple purposes: defense, agriculture, food, grazing, just restoration as a tool. So it's a really cool tool. It's a great tool. It's a powerful tool. And it's something that hopefully we'll be continuing to use in the future. Obviously, as we grow in population and stuff, we start getting some challenges, but I won't go there. So for me, I got into fire, which is probably the reason why a lot of you get into outdoor management stuff is you like to be outside. I like to joke there's 3 reasons we get into fire is that we can't stand being in office, we can't do math, and we like burning things up. And so it's an oversimplification. There's a few of us in fire who can't do math. I'm not one of them, but that's why I stayed on the ground. I didn't go into aviation. And but I got into fire because I'd always been outdoors, hunting, fishing, skiing. And so when I got out, a buddy of mine who had got out a few years before me went into, he ended up going on the zigzag hot shots. And he gave me a call and he's like, dude, this is it. It's like being in without having to deal with all the military garbage and BS. And I was like, oh, sweet. So started out that way on a crew and worked my way through. And I was fortunate enough in my career, and this is something you're going to hear me run through as a theme. And so this is, and I encourage this, that's why I think it's nice that both of you are looking at it from a land management perspective, is that, and so for all of you, I do encourage, look at this first from a land management perspective when you think about fire. So when I entered fire, it was still in the days when fuels had been, or it originated from forestry. You'll hear things called BD crews, brush disposal crews, and those were people who just chased timber. When we did timber, we had post-activity harvest fuels, and we ended up with a lot of stuff that needed to get getting rid of. And at the time, biomass wasn't a huge thing, so we just lit them off. And we would light off windrows of, I mean, I'm talking 200 feet long, 60 feet tall decks of just garbage, treetops usually, because there was no, they'd cut the treetops off because they weren't useful. And we would just light those things up, stand back, and just watch glory. And it was fun. But I had an opportunity at that point to see fire from a land management perspective and not as a suppression orientation, that it's something where we're doing it because we're trying to save someone's house or a city or something like that, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. It's just everything else, most of what we're doing is land management. So we're struggling as an organization, as a new field, in all honesty, of emergency management, trying to balance that difference between land management and suppression, because we have several of us, not only in the Forest Service, but in other organizations, are, oh, I'm a firefighter and this is where I'm going to go and this is what I want to do. And so we deal so much with that suppression mindset that we often forget that managing fire, even from suppression, is just a type of land management. We just have some different objectives. We have the objective of we're trying to save some people's homes. We get it. We may not be using ecology for that. So the tripping down to that, that's sort of how I got in, and that's sort of the path I went along, hand crews, engines. I had too much self-respect to be a jumper and too much integrity to be a hell attack. So I stayed as a hand crew member for most of my life, and then in engines. For those who know fire, that's a joke, obviously. The only difference in fire is how we get there. We all fight fire the same way. So in there, just kind of grew up in fire, but I'd always had fuels. I had that good start from there. So I'd always been working with fuels folks. And I'd always been in forests where we had fuels. We did some type of fuels management. And you'll often hear us talk about that difference between suppression and fuels, because our objectives do tend to be different. But in the end, we're still using fire. So it's been a trip. I know that most people who see fire and think of fire, and so here's moments where we may get a little sober. So when we talk about fire, and I'm going to share my screen to show, because this is probably what a lot of people think about when they think of fire. So hopefully folks are seeing this. I apologize for the quality of this video. This video was taken, I would say, when some of you probably, well, yeah, this video was taken, let's just say 480 pixels was the max that you were getting on your camera those days. So it was a while back, but this is what a lot of people think of probably when they see fire. I'll hit play on this one. Well, maybe not. There we go.
Echo.
Oops. Sorry about that. I don't know, it's only 30 seconds, but is that what people think? A lot of times you think fire and that's what you're thinking, right? Yeah. I mean, you can give thumbs up on the screen if you need to. Yeah. Colin, what do you think? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
But, I'll second that.
Yeah. That's, that's a lot of us think fire. And then of course, that was a prescribed fire. And here's what we think of, when we're thinking, this is what we all see and think when we're thinking of a suppression fire. We all want to see this. Big old air tankers coming through, dropping off. From an ecology standpoint, for those who are on, you think that fire needs to be put out?
For this one you're showing right now, no.
Yeah.
I think I don't think it needs to be put out if there's no need to protect like structures, any special resources that can't handle fire. Yeah, I don't know what Carlin's thinking.
I'd say exactly. It all comes down to effects versus the values that are at risk.
Yeah.
And you have to measure each incident based on that. It's not just one or the other. Put it out or don't put it out. It just depends on what fire needs to do on the land and what is it actually doing and going to do in the future.
But, when we look at fire, you're probably all thinking some of this stuff as well as this kind of stuff. This is us doing some back burning at night. Looks cool, doesn't it? What a really cool picture. Oops, not that one. So this is the part we don't talk about. This is what I was going to get to. Apparently the slideshow's a little out. There's another part we don't talk about in fire. So those were the cool things I was showing you. This is not me. This is a buddy of mine. We came off of an initial attack, 36 hours straight working. We didn't even drive home. He lives 30 minutes from the office. This is what he did. He walked in, laid down, and I'm in the bed of the truck behind him, sleeping, because we worked 36 hours straight on an initial attack. That came from a prescribed burn. I got lit up by somebody on a prescribed burn. We were pulling them. But we also get to see this. This is us driving in somewhere in New Mexico, heading to a fire. We get to see beautiful things like that. We get to see that. We get to see this. That's in Montana. I got to ride, get paid to take a pack mule train in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. The Bob Marshall Wilderness, we always call it the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and spend almost 14 days. And so we're heading up towards Badger Cabin, which is up there, kind of up that way. We took a pack train in there and worked a remote fire in the wilderness. And it was a blast. So we get to go to areas and see this kind of stuff. So that's the cool part about fire. That's really one of the cool things about it. But one thing, and I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer when I say this, but one thing that we do not talk about in fire, oops, I got to get out of this slow. Oops, let me move my stuff just a second. One thing that we don't talk about in fire is this part. It is not a safe career. I have 14 buddies that I have lost to fire. Some in actual fires, some in prescribed fires, some outside of it. Some have committed suicide for various reasons. We don't know why, because we're not going to be able to ask them. But this is the part. So if you're getting into fire, this is something else to think about. It is not a safe career. It has chances of getting to, well, you saw me, I got burned up twice. I've been burned. I have the scars to show it. And then like I said, we've had people that die, and I don't want to bring it down sober, but I want to point it out that we all see cool pictures. I know there was a movie out there called The Only the Brave. But remember, that movie was about 19 firefighters who met their end up on Yarnell Hill in Arizona. Yeah. So it's not the safest career, but it is a fun career. It's a rewarding career. And so that's the part that I want to get to when we start talking about some of the questions that Heather had in there, like what knowledge and skills and attitudes that you were asking about, the things that you guys can take away from this. And to me, the most important thing for you folks and any of those who are going to be watching this later is skills are important and knowledge is important, but a lot of this is your attitude. You need to find value in what you do. And land management is very rewarding. It can be a struggle, it can be a pain, but it's rewarding. And so if you find value in what you're doing, it's not so much about being happy in it, because you will be happy because you find value. So that's trying to say, oh, I want to do this because I love doing this. I was a ski guide for years. I was a member of the American Mountain Guides Association. So I skied, did a lot of ski touring, alpine climbing, and with folks and clients. And I did it because I loved it. And I just loved being out skiing and climbing. And I ended up hating it because it was a job. I was happy doing it, but I found out I was happiest when I wasn't around the clients. And so that's when I was a seasonal, because that's the other thing about this job is you'll more than likely be a seasonal for several years, unless you're fortunate enough to get in with a group already. But find value in what you're doing. And the keys to success in anything you're doing, whether it's this degree, this program, whether you're going into forestry, fire, if you want to stay, go into fire ecology, is be present and be engaged. Don't just do it because you want to do it. Be present and be engaged in what you're doing. Get in there. Have a good, positive attitude. that goes a long way. You wouldn't believe how much a good positive attitude will make things go. And the most important one to me, this isn't just in fire, this is anything, this is every day in your life. Always ask how you can help. Say, how can I help? That changes the whole dynamic for everything. Whoever you're working with, whatever you're doing, wherever you're working, it's an amazing shift in the way you see things and the way people will see you. So, but if you want something specific and drilling down into something, Carla, and I would say for you, just forestry, going into forestry and having that opportunity to have a good foundation in the roots of not only land management and fire, but understanding the overall process of, if you do go to land management, such as Forest Service, or you go to state, you'll understand it much better. They're going to talk about the ecology and the whole aspects of everything. And you may do like some of their students do, which are they end up taking ecology as a secondary, or the fire management as a secondary, like a minor or something. So they're primary in forestry because it's a good job. It's fun. You can be out there all the time in the woods. And then Nicole, for you working in Department of Defense, you're going to have the same challenges with folks who work in the government, which is dealing with government.
Yeah, and we're dealing with the public big time right now, not just with the prescribed fire, but we want to build a machine gun range and they're going to fire tracers. That's a huge wildfire risk on the Cape, which has a wildfire regime, which just hasn't been going on for 50 plus years. And it's just, got to deal with people. The soldiers aren't actually the problem. It's the people off base we've been having way more issues with, of trying to get them used to fire and smoke. We got called out on our smoke on Wednesday and we did a 20-acre unit. It was nothing compared to what we're going to do next year. So
yeah, and the public relations is a big thing, and that's one of the biggest issues where you can start to see where tying back into it. If you're positive, the people are going to begin to pick up on that. If you are present and engaged with the public, they're going to pick up on that. They're going to pick up on when you're being false. And first of all, when we're in land management, our responsibility, we're public servants.
Yeah.
And that is our job, is to respond and help the public, whether when I say uneducated, I don't mean it as a bad way, but they're just not familiar with the things that we know. The benefit to both of you in this case, and like you were asking about whether you want to follow suppression or stay and go ecology.
Yeah.
So here's the thing about it. If you go with one of the big 5 land management agencies, which is prescribes to the NWCG, which, by the way, I don't know if National Guard is going.
We are right now in the process of rolling into NWCG standards for everybody. So here's the thing. This is for everybody. So obviously those who I'm talking to who aren't on this, or you're going to watch this later. The National Wildland Coordination Group, Wildland Fire Coordination Group, is the body that's responsible for setting the policies for prescribed fires as well as wildland fires. And the way it's set up right now is all prescribed fire qualifications are gated by suppression. You have to go through suppression to get there. So if an organization, if the National Guard, if Mass National Guard decides that they want to go with 100% NWCG, then you're going to have to follow a little suppression, and you're going to have to follow up at least to ICT4, which shouldn't be too hard in some respects. I mean, Massachusetts has fires. You can get out on some. Eventually we're going to get out there.
Well, and there are some things coming down the road. I can tell you here in Arizona, we're working with Camp Navajo to build a National Guard prescribed fire training type program for National Guard folks. So I just was on the phone with them today about that stuff, or yesterday about that. So that'll be I'm shooting for fall of next year, so it'll be a while. but that's a different topic. But so for those who are questions like, oh, I really love the science. Perfect. It is awesome that you love the science, because one of the things about fuels is you have to be a little bit of a nerd. You have to be really interested in the why and the what of what's going on. You just don't, I just like fire. I like playing with fire. Well, you can like playing with fire, but you have the question behind
Why is fire doing what it's doing? What it's doing late, and where's it going? So you're going to have to go a little bit of suppression. And that's good though, because you'll understand fire from a management perspective in that case, or a suppression aspect, but you'll get familiar with fire and you'll get comfortable around fire to the point where you can start to stretch your legs a little when it comes to prescribed fire. And like you were saying, Nicole, you were talking, oh, with 20 acres is nothing. We're going bigger, which you guys have it lucky, man. You just wait for an offshore breeze and you just run it to the ocean.
Yeah, that's normally what we do. And we have a goal of like 2,500 acres, minimum of 25 burns. And like this was the first year after COVID, we really got into it. We have our new wildland fire program coordinator. We got 16 burns in and we got a little over like 400 acres, but
Nice.
we're going to get up there. We need to do it.
You all got to start somewhere. So,
Oh yeah.
So going back to sort of those questions where like Carlin says he's kind of looking for where he wants to go. Perfect. You're at the perfect age, perfect time to just explore and get out there and play. I recommend that for those folks who are in Carlin's situation, take a summer. First of all, get out of this idea that you have to immediately get into college. You don't have to. You can go out and get a little life experience and come back. It's doable. It's possible. And this is a great class to get you to that foundational information, that foundational knowledge to get there, and then go out, try some stuff, see what happens. Because I'm amazed at the number of people who I meet who are in the 4-year program, and I'm not dissuading anybody from a 4-year, but when I meet in the 4-year program, and they have never done wildland fire. So go back to the picture I showed you with Bo sleeping in the back of his pickup truck because we pushed 36 hours straight. We couldn't get any resources. It was our engine. Well, it was his engine. I was IC on that fire. We had one engine, one hand crew, and we pushed a 1,000-acre fire with literally like 27 people. And we caught it. Took us 36 hours to do it, but it's hard work. It is very hard work, but it's rewarding work if that's the kind of stuff you enjoy. So you're going to have to get a little suppression under your belt. So there's no way of getting around it, especially if you're prescribed an NWCG. If you're a state person or you're working for one of our cooperators, and when I say ours, I shouldn't say it that way. If you're working for a cooperator, if you're working for like a municipality or something like that, the suppression quals aren't as important. They have a different mission. They have a different mindset. And unless you start looking at wildland fire, you don't have to really worry about it. Follow that path. Then if you get into suppression, EMS is cool. I mean, suppression is cool. I'm not going to knock it. It's funny. We always joke about people who do suppression, the fire structure, the structure suppression folks. We're always like, I'm never going to do that. That's in a building. And those guys are like, I'm never going to do that because you're outside. So we all have our niches, but dabble in it. Go and play in it and follow it. When you want to follow the fuels path, which is what I did, I probably switched more solid into fuels. I always stayed back and forth between fuels and suppression, and didn't really step into fuels like as a total hard drive job until probably 8-9 years ago, as a primary focus and as a fuel specialist and moving through that stuff. The suppression background did give me some good knowledge. It gave me good understanding of how fire, but fuels is a lot more than just suppression. It's understanding the whole gestalt, the dynamic of fire and the ecology of it and the behavior of it, and looking at it from a little different manner. So if you just want to do suppression, great, but come at suppression from being a land manager first, and then think about it as I'm a firefighter, and that'll really, really help. And so it's kind of combining some of these ideas that Heather wanted us to get towards with you folks and answering some of those questions about like knowledges and skills. And if I'm looking over this way, I apologize. I have a board over here to make sure that I don't wander too far off track. But the thing that's really cool about fire is even if you don't stick in it, it's going to give you a feeling of like accomplishment. I know several people who have been in fire, they were in fire for 4 years, 5 years, and then they left for one reason or another. We have a young lady who I supervised on an engine. She is a pediatric nurse. And it's really cool. She calls me every once in a while just for updates and some questions about stuff in general. But what's really cool about it is she says that because she was on fire, it taught her about adapting quickly to change and recognizing that there's some chaos out there, but you can settle it down. Because she's a pediatric nurse, so everybody's like, "Oh my God, it's a baby," and everybody freaks out and stuff. So there are a lot of life skills that you can get if you don't even stay in fire. Making sense of chaos, recognizing that it's all going to come out in the end. It'll be good. It'll all come out good in the end. And adapting to change quickly. Those are some of the things I remember talking to her. Actually, it was like 2 weeks ago when she called to talk, and that's what made me think about her. But so I definitely recommend go out, try some things. And Cole, obviously, you're already dealing with it, and Carlin, you're started looking. And for those other folks who are still looking, you're on the right path. You're seeking some knowledge from some people who have been involved. Heather has a history in this, a background. You guys, I think you all saw her presentation. So there's an opportunity for you to reach out to other people. I'm always available. Heather has my contact information. I think Joe will too. To reach out and ask questions if you need to further on down the road. But so there is, so don't think that if you go into fire, you're like, "Oh God, that was nothing." Because I joke with Heather all the time. I'm like, I'm absolutely useless for a real job. I mean, my skills are, I'm a professional arsonist. I mean, that's not going to parlay anything unless I want to go work for the mob after I get out of this work. So that's, that's my skill set. If you think, so one of the benefits, like with Nicole and for other folks who are thinking, okay, well, I really like the science component of fire. And why I encourage you to at least spend a little time on an engine or a hand crew or with Helitack or something like that and get in there and play is because eventually you're going to come up with this stuff called modeling. Modeling is just a term that we use. We'll say it, and it's this broad thing. You'll hear a lot of people go modeling, and it can mean a lot of things to different people. But really, a model is just, in most cases, especially in fire, it is a mathematical representation of our reality. It's what we do. We put it into a program that crunches a bunch of numbers in the background, and it spits out what we think the world's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have experience to be able to interpret that. If you don't have experience, then all you see is a bunch of pixels on a screen, and you don't know what to do with it. So having an open mind, critical thinking, analytical thinking skills are very important to get to that point of being able to understand what a model is. So for those folks who are thinking, oh, I want to take this degree because I want to go sit in an office and punch some numbers and watch a bunch of pixels dance on a screen and paint some pretty colors, you're going to have to rely either, at that point, you're going to have to go back and rely on people who spend their time dealing with the reality of what your model is trying to represent, or have enough information to start giving yourself some good information about whether that model's tracking in the right direction. And so to give you an example, work with a young gentleman. His name's Daniel. He's from Tall Timbers. So we're working with some really advanced models. So one of the things that we're doing, changing in the fire environment, is shifting from this idea of Rotham's fire spread, which is a model that was built off of a jet fuel equation for the consumption of jet fuel. And it works. It does what we want it to do, but to a point. But what we are looking at is a lot of the scientists, the people who aren't firefighters, but are interested in the science, have started to discover that fire is more of a fluid type dynamic. So it's fluid physics. So we're starting to use fluid physics-based models, and they're really cool looking. And they're representing fire in a much more realistic fashion. So working with this gentleman, Daniel, who's showed me this stuff, he's like, oh yeah, we'll take the DEMS, which are digital elevation models. Now out here in West, as you know, Carlin, we have elevation. Cape Cod, all 2 feet, and you guys call it a hill. But yeah, it is what it is. So you guys don't really need digital elevation models as much. But they take these models and they throw them out there. And then what they do is they can put the fire on the landscape and it can react as it would in real life. And so they were throwing some models, they're throwing fire on the ground, playing around, and they were like, he kept saying, he's like, I can't figure out why this fire is behaving this way when it starts to get towards the top of the hill. He's a modeler. That is his reality. That's his business. His PhD is in being, and I can't remember what he called himself. It was like this heuristic something modeling. I mean, he had this fancy name for a really long title, a lot of words with lots of consonants and syllables in it. And he was doing it. It was burning all the way up. And so he was lighting all the fires from the bottom of this hill. And then it was blowing everything out of the top. And he couldn't figure out why. I was like, well, because you're lighting fire at the top of the hill. And so that's an example of somebody who's highly intelligent, very good at modeling, understood enough to say, hey, wow, something weird's going on with this model, but doesn't have enough experience to know that, wait, should be lighting it from the top, not from the bottom. Want to blow out the stand, light it from the bottom. Perfect. So yeah, I definitely getting the experience in, getting some time, getting on a hand crew, getting some of that stuff. So you just get some of that real world experience. So that if you do decide to just shift gears and all of a sudden all you want to do is play in the modeling world and you want to play with computers, you'll have at least a good foundation to understand when you don't know what you don't know. And then you can seek the right people and have them answer or help you answer the questions that you need to answer. Because all good research just generates more questions. And, one of the things that I know, whether you want to work for the state or the feds, you're going to have to be prepared to crawl. That our job is a blue collar job. You learn fire by doing it. You cannot learn everything in school. What Heather's doing here is a really nice foundational introduction to the stuff that we've talked about that would be good for our firefighters, making you more well-rounded, making you think about those things that you're going to experience in fire as you go through your career. So you're going to have to enter in at a basic level. And we just have these progressions, and they are not quick to get to. In fact, I didn't think about this one until just now. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I apologize. Pause here.
While you're looking, I'll throw a quick suggestion or plug in for Carlin and for Nicole. I know you already said you were full time with the National Guard, but if you want to get the most bang for your buck as far as experience goes, and if you're interested in land management, ecology, the science, and prescribed fire, go check out the Wildland Fire Module with the National Park Service. They specialize in managing wilderness fires. Your job is basically to go out in the woods for weeks at a time, living out of a cooler and watching fire and documenting what it does and lighting it sometimes and fighting it others. You get to work on your suppression quals, but really it's more of a prescribed fire kind of a job.
It's fun. I played on some of those WFM. Well, we call them WFMs now, Wildland Fire Modules. Fire use went out of term, but we still use it.
It's still stuck in my brain. I apologize.
No.
They're way cool. I would have done that in my career if I would have known about them early enough.
They are fun. They're a good opportunity to get out and play. And like you said, you get paid to camp. So, in fact, actually, that one picture I showed you where we were on the mule train, I seen a wilderness fire, and I had 4 WFMs working with me, all set up in these remote areas of the wilderness out there in the Babo. And that's what they did. Stayed out there for 2 weeks, staying in cabins. I mean, it was hard life, really hard life. So what's on the screen right now, and one of the reasons why I brought it up quickly was you can see, if you go all the way to the top, if you follow this all the way to following what's considered our Forest Service fire program management standards, if you go all the way to top and look, a forest fuel specialist, which is a person who normally does modeling, 11.8 years to get there. That's the average. And that's based on the fact that it takes about 1.8 years to complete a task book in fire. And I can tell you that that's being very generous, because usually you hang out, and Nicole, you probably could attest to this, but you normally hang out as a firefighter type 2 for 2 or 3 years. And then you go to a firefighter type 1, and that can be 4 to 5 years, depending on how much experience, exposure you get and where you're at. And you can see that. So that's why we put it on the 1.8 years, but you can hang out as a fuels tech firefighter type 1 for almost 8 years. So you take that on top of your college, and you're looking down the road. So that's why I say be prepared to crawl. But this is just a graphic that we put out. One of the things, it was because when Heather, and I hope everybody can see it. But what was happening is when Heather and I were talking about this a long time ago and talking to her students, you were always asking, what am I going to get out of this? What do I get and why? And so the most important part, the most honest part that we can give you is that you are not going to graduate college and immediately walk into a GS 11-12 fire fuels planner. That's not the reality. And that's just not the way it works. So letting you know that that's there. And Heather has a copy of that. So if you guys want to hold on a copy, we have a copy for suppression too, but it's pretty much the same. We just change out the positions that are there. So yeah, be prepared to crawl. It's going to take a while. Carlin, you're at the perfect age, man, to do it. The crawl. You have a lot of time behind it. You don't have a career going in there. But just remember, we are a technical career. We're a career that you learn by doing. And so taking this first step, this path like this and getting into this, and I don't know what number Heather's called this class, but taking a course like this, it's the perfect, because it's perfect exposure. It's the right level of exposure to enough education and enough training with leveraging what you've already had the opportunity to learn and get to where you're needing to go. And so I know when Heather and I talked about this, you two are the perfect examples of the students she wanted. People that already played a little, people who are just coming out of high school. So, Carlin, if you look at IDL, Idaho Department of Lands, or you look at the Forest Service, I can tell you that the Forest Service is hiring regularly, and they are the bigger player in Idaho. So a lot of states, the Forest Service is the bigger player. Where we are not the big player are states like Nevada. That's a lot of desert land. We're not the big player there. We are mixed when it comes to being like in Wyoming and Colorado and Montana, though we have more land in there. So if you're looking to kind of get into it, though the bigger forces out west tend to have more opportunities to bring in seasonal firefighters, which would be perfect for going to school, coming back, trying it out. Don't worry about taking time off and coming back in. It's okay, because you know what? What's not going away is school. It'll always be here. So if you step out, go play with fire a little bit, check some things out. And in fact, you'll find a lot of the people who have spent a lot of time in fire. I mean, I started fire in 1997. So yeah, there's a reason why there's gray in his beard. But I started fire in 1997. And I did not get my graduate work until I think it was 2011 is when I started that stuff. So you can see that there's a gap in there. And not only that, with undergraduate too. I didn't start right out at undergraduate. So you don't have to immediately come out of high school, go into college, get that and follow that path. If you're going to one of these unique things like wildland fire. But the cool thing about this program is it's going to teach you the holistic portion of fire, just not suppression, just not fuels, but the understanding the whole program of fire, the whole enchilada, about how fire is a tool, and it's a really cool tool, and you can either use it as a suppression, because we do use it for suppression. We backburn all the time to put out the fire to keep it from going where we don't want, and we use it in prescribed fire, as you saw in that first video, in a ponderosa pine. And wasn't that? I mean, that is a beautiful ponderosa pine understory, and that's because we regularly burn it and apply fire to a neck of the woods where the ecology, the regime, is low intensity, high frequency fires in that neck of the woods. And so, yeah, I would say in that case, just remember that if you want to really be in the programming side of the world, it's going to take a while to get there, but you can get there sooner by just taking some time and then get out. But that sounds like I'm circling back around on some things. So that being said, I know that Joe, those were some of the questions that she wanted to get at. I didn't know if we needed to go out the full hour. I wanted to take some time to make sure that folks had an opportunity to, after I got done talking quickly at folks, that they had an opportunity to ask more questions if they wanted, or see if I even hit some of the answers to the questions they had.
No, I think that all is incredibly relevant, and I think we hit most, if not all, the points of that Heather had for us within that discussion. So I think basically I would just open it up for Nicole and Carlin. Any last questions or anything else you want to discuss with Tim?
My question is, why did you pick U.S. Forest Service over all the other agencies you could have worked for?
Well, I ETS'd at Joint Base. At the time, it wasn't Joint Base. But so I was already up in a neck of the woods where Forest Service was king up in that neck of the woods. And that's where my buddy ended up going. He went up to the Forest Service. And probably because he knew about it because his dad worked for the Forest Service. So there's that connection. So that's how I got into that one. I mean, I don't think if I'd been living in Nevada, I probably would have gone to the BLM or Southern Idaho. I probably would have gone to the BLM.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that's why the Forest Service.
What do you wish you'd done differently when you first got into the area?
Into fire?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question. I think knowing now, I know this is gonna sound weird, probably like, I'd wished I'd been a little more curious about the role of fire and fire ecology at the time. Instead, I was just having way too much fun lighting things on fire, running around, doing stuff, things like that, without having to deal with big army and all that other fun stuff. It's like a lot like my buddy when he got out, he's like, dude, it's like being in the army without being in the army. It's all the fun things. It's getting paid to camp and light things on fire. So yeah, I think I would say that's if anything, I would wish. I'm not trying to be cheesy and I'm not trying to plug it. I'd probably wish that there would have been something like this program that Heather's building in the beginning, because I think it definitely would have changed the way I look at fire. And I can tell you that I would not. So I'm one of those. I mean, when you look at the class, which is 11.8 years and everything like that, I mean, I didn't get a permanent full-time position in the Forest Service until what's now 7 years. I was a permanent seasonal forever. And so that may not mean things to a lot of people, but if I say 18 and 8, 13 and 13, I was a seasonal employee. So, and some of that just had to do with not knowing the path that fire, that what I could do and where I could go. And, but I didn't lose anything by being on a shot crew. I didn't lose anything by being on a hand crew. Didn't lose anything by playing what I played with. I just think it would have been better if I'd had something where I had more exposure, so I would have been able to identify earlier those things that I needed to target. So yeah, that's a good question. Made me think a little bit there, darn you.
And sorry, I kind of missed a part right at the beginning. When did you first go to school for fire?
I think it was when they told me that I needed to use my GI Bill. For fire specifically would have been, I think it was 2009, 2010. I can't remember exactly when the Forest Service or when University of Idaho created their first program for fire management. But I want to say it was maybe 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in there. So it was a while. I mean, and my undergrad has nothing to do with fire. My undergrad is criminal psychology, forensic psychology. So I was looking at going to be a popo, be a cop. But then my buddy derailed that and put me on the path of staying outside and lighting things on fire. So yeah, no, it took me a while. And I can imagine, I mean, you ask Joe, you ask a lot of us. We didn't start our advanced education stuff until way later in our careers, in our life.
My only advice would be is don't put it off too long. That's what I did. I still don't have a 4-year degree. I kind of did twists and turns, and I've started it back up, but I've hit a ceiling where I could go in the jobs I can hold because I don't have that upper level education. I got an associate's degree. I was doing structure fire. I was a captain paramedic, and I didn't need, that 4-year degree in forestry or whatever. And so I just stopped where I was. And now 20 years later, it's a lot harder to get started back up than to just continually chip away at it. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
And that is good. That's good advice. I do know that the agency, at least for the Forest Service, I can't speak for the other agencies, we've recognized that overwhelming life shift, and the agency is trying to make it more convenient for folks to go back to school while not having to leave the organization, because we're gated by that suppression skill set. So, even though Joe's saying that, there's certain things he wants to do that he can't do, education wise, there's enough of us in the organization that quals are more important than your education.
Yeah.
The education helps, and it's good, and it makes you more well-rounded. That's why, to me, starting out earlier with like a program like this, the way I would have done it was I would have taken this program, still stayed with fire, played in fire a little bit, kept doing things, playing around, and then come back to school just because of my mindset. But I have a lot of buddies who would take this program and would never go back to school after that. They don't want school. They would much rather just go hunt, fish, play in the woods. And that's perfect for them. But what we've done is we've made a thinking firefighter, instead of someone who's just responding to an event that occurred to them and putting black on the ground. They're thinking now. They're getting to understand why fire is being used the way it is.
And one thing I hope that we can get to, we're starting to work towards is developing a program that you can go get that experience and work and take these courses, either doing them in workshop fashion as opposed to, 16 weeks, twice a week kind of thing. Doing them in the off season, the actual, October to March timeframe, not the traditional semesters where you're bumping into hiring and end of season on a lot of the traditional crews. So we're tossing around a lot of ideas, trying to make things more accessible. So it's not a choice. You either go get experience or you go get an education. We'd like to see, you be able to get a little bit of both. It may take you longer to get that degree, but the experience you get at the same time will be invaluable as you get it.